Hello everyone, and welcome to the third and final session in our workflow automation series. Nice to have you all back again. I'd like to hand you over to Brian Gavin to continue and introduce the speakers. Thank you, Brian. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, and welcome everyone to our third installment, the most exciting, where I get to have the pleasure of being joined by Rana and David. I first just want to say a few thank yous for the folks that have been with us since the beginning. Thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us learning about workflow automation and the technology and the processes that go to make that possible. And certainly a big thank you to the team at Henry Stewart, Amazon Web Services, and Sella. Want to welcome Rana and David to our final conversation today.
We got to stop meeting like this, Brian.
Good to be here, Brian.
Thanks so much. Guys, we have an hour. We're going to unpack a ton. For anyone who wants to get in touch with myself, Rana, or David, these are our LinkedIn QR codes. You have our email addresses. Please take advantage of Rana and David. I've had the opportunity to learn so much from you both. So let's get right into the future of workflow automation. So I think it's pretty nice as you look at where is my business today, and anyone who's on the call today as a content creator or a marketer, and really focused on how content is ultimately consumed, really best in breed technology, implementation, and workflow management across Global Edit. And so with Global Edit, our huge focus and where we believe creatives are headed is in the workflow automation of really important tasks in the creative and marketing process that ultimately, with an interconnected ecosystem, which is kind of our second huge focus for you all on the call today, is allowing the brands and the content producers and the studios to have a really connected ecosystem of technology. And by doing so, we feel as though a holistic approach to content management. And this goes to the depths of having your photography and your video and your graphic design files all managed through one workflow management system. So really excited as Global Edit is on the cutting edge of this and has such great partners like Rana, yourself at AWS. So go ahead and talk to us a little bit about where we're going to be focused today from Amazon's perspective.
Sure. So at AWS, we're excited about how the cloud is now enabling all kinds of new automated workflows for digital asset management. One of the things it offers is massive scale in terms of you now being able to turn on petabytes of storage at the click of a button, and also to spin up compute instances on demand and then shut them down when you don't need them. So there are no long hardware procurement cycles. Everything is pay as you go. And experimenting is really cheap. We're also really excited about personalization, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the program as to how you can enable your users to engage with more, content that's more relevant to them.
Awesome, and certainly, David, you bring the wealth of people, process, and technology together under the arms of where Sella's focused, and so really excited for you to help us unpack some of the key points that we discussed in our conversation.
Yeah, from Sella's perspective, we assist our partners in evolving to that future state. Brands turn to us to help them flush out whatever it is they need to do to be able to position themselves so as to take advantage of these new technologies. I'm a big believer in getting your house in order first before turning on the lights and really like letting technology take over. So we address areas of focus in regards to process improvement or resourcing, so as to then be able to put together an appropriate technology strategy that's relevant to the maturity level of the organization, with the goal of getting to overall operational efficiency.
Awesome. So for those that are trying to do a little bit of time management planning, we're going to now spend about the next 40 minutes unpacking how getting your house in order is done across the technology and process and strategy components. So I'm really excited for David to jump into the future of automation and help us understand what it means to get the house in order and what it means for creating a framework that allows your brand, which is unique in the needs of your audience and your buyer, to have that framework. So David, we spent a lot of time in the first conversation talking very high level, but now we have some more directed points on the foundational aspects of managing content at scale.
Yeah, what I wanted to impart in that first session was just to communicate the range. When we talk about workflow automation or automation in general, there's a huge range of entry points, all from like the most simplistic all the way through very, very highly complex and advanced approaches. And so even though we focus on, by definition, the term automation is removing the human element to it, there are certain things that can be done within the organization that are very much involved in put the human first and front and center in regards to how the organization needs to operate. The easiest entry point towards automation is just establishing succinct and defined workflows. So even before we want to take advantage of technology, just looking at process improvement is so crucial, so as to be able to standardize and put guidelines together in regards to how do we work. You know, how does work and content data flow through the organization in the most effective way possible? And then once that's defined, then we can actually take advantage towards automating it. But from the most simplistic perspective, once that workflow is defined, the easiest entry point for automation is our workflow triggers. The moment that I'm done with a particular task and I inform whatever system I'm working in that I am done with that task, it moves on to the next worker in the chain. So it's important to recognize that is automation in and of itself. You know, the assignment of tasks to another person is you're automating your work, but you got to get the process defined and succinct before you're able to take advantage of that. From there, we get into removing dependencies on lightening the load on humans to manage the administration of this, where your creatives can be more focused on doing just that, being creative, receiving assignments to tasks directly within their creative application, you know, within the tools that they know and love and want to be in every day. And then ultimately getting into like more advanced approaches where, you know, we start focusing on automation towards enabling an omni-channel strategy. And that focuses on really like how we approach our entire infrastructure related to technology, and make it more foundational in terms of the enterprise foundational layer for different channels to take advantage of content. Once we have that foundational layer established and we can deliver an omni-channel strategy, that's when we get in and can take advantage of really exciting areas of focus, like where we start to get into hyper-personalized marketing, where you're building dynamic content on the fly based on the persona segment of the user who's visiting your website at any given time. So all this being said, a range of entry points, but you got to get the house in order before you do anything.
Really good call out, David. And one of the things that stuck with me from when Rana and I kicked off almost 2 months ago was, Rana, we talked about workflow automation isn't new to the business, to the brand, that the invoice generation in an accounts receivable process that we looked at, and how many steps there were in putting the invoice in the envelope and mailing it. And now workflow automation solved that in finance, and those job responsibilities shifted, and the finance teams of the businesses are thriving. And it's interesting now in the creative space where the future is now, and those responsibility shifts are happening. Rana, on your side, where the early adopters, which I think would be of those technologies that are provided by Amazon Web Services, how are you finding that those responsibilities shift, or how is Amazon finding it's best to be effective when you're focused on implementing automation in creative workflows?
Yeah, so within an organization, the people who may have had more menial jobs, like for an invoice processing, someone may have had to scan an invoice in, or someone may have to have put the invoice in an envelope and mailed it. With workflow automation, that invoice can be scanned and the bill can be extracted and put into the accounts payable. So there's no more need for manual labor at that point, just to scan it in. And then the invoice can be put into the accounts payable system, and the payment can even be automatically generated and paid to the vendor's bank. So now you're eliminating all the clerical steps of putting that of printing it and putting it in an envelope and things like that. So within an organization, people can now focus on higher level activities and not more menial steps such as this. So this is how workflow automation is changing the tasks that people do in the industry. And this carries over to digital asset management as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And David, your team being on the front lines of these implementations, are you seeing that as folks adopt the principles that you're guiding us through, that folks are finding different avenues to be effective or more productive within the creative production process?
We the honest answer is that there's still a long way to go. The dream of automation is the kind of like, shiny dangling carrot that's being held out in front of us. So there's a lot of legwork that is the reality in terms of how we need to what we need to do first before we're able to kind of take advantage of it. But that being said, the awareness of new strategy is becoming much more ubiquitous, and so we're not having to introduce concepts to people as much. They're aware of the concepts, and so that's a good starting point. We're already one step ahead of the game, where we're not exposing them to these new strategies, where they're already aware of it, and we're just taking the first step towards it.
Awesome. And hopefully, if there's a takeaway from the 3 webinars that we've had the opportunity to all speak on, is today really is about that awareness factor. If everyone is equally as passionate as David, Rana, and I are about where workflow automation is, it means that you can look holistically across your content lifecycle and start to drum up what this ecosystem to you is. And David, I guess it starts with an audit and an understanding of what ROI is across creative and marketing?
Absolutely. I mean, whenever you put in a system that has the promise of automating tasks, it's going to quickly shine a light in regards to any gaps that already exist. And so I'm a big believer in going through process improvement exercise before moving forward with any sort of implementation. Once you actually have that technology in place, you are going to be able to benefit with a lot of visibility and transparency in regards to what the current operational health of the organization is. Are you, like, for example, like what you see on the screen, like, do we have redundancy of tasks or redundancy of responsibilities, roles, etc.? Do we have standardization of processes, of naming conventions, etc., of workflows? That's really like where we start to accelerate on once you have a standardized process, the throughput of creative content just starts to accelerate. We're able to provide visibility and collaboration. Like, oftentimes when we talk about collaboration, people just think, oh, it's communication, or the ability to, I've got the ability to easily communicate or ask questions of somebody within a certain platform that I'm doing the work. But no, it's just also about transparency in regards to where a creative request may be at in its overall life cycle. The visibility of status is a huge opportunity around collaboration, and just automating that alone provides a huge benefit to people. There is no such thing as true autopilot, but we can get to a point where the work is moving at a consistent clip without without too many curveballs getting thrown at us, and that's where we really start to look at start to gain overall efficiency.
And I can appreciate autopilot is sort of a bold statement, and one of the aspects that you've impressed upon me, David, through the learning of these conversations is it's continuous improvement. And when it's comprehensive in the fact that all of your data is maintained and accessible by the ecosystem of technology that your brand believes you need to have, together to be effective in your overall strategy, it then means that you have the ability to be continuous improvement. And Rana, you helped us unpack some of the examples of where by being comprehensive or moving to the cloud, there has been mass amounts of improvement or comprehensiveness in the ability for that brand or that content producer to be more efficient.
Can I say one thing real quick, Rana, before you jump in? I just want to that point, when we talk about autopilot, what's going on autopilot is changing the approach to manual file management. At its core, the fundamental shift, and this leads into kind of like the use of the cloud for asset storage and repositories, that we went from a scenario where the asset was sent from a user, like a user would send an asset to another user for feedback, whether it's attaching a photo to an email, sending that to a distribution list, getting feedback on that, where the user was sending the asset. So we fundamentally flipped the model whereby the assets are stored in one location and users are coming to the asset instead of the asset going to the user. And that in and of itself is the holy grail in terms of like what it's done as far as like getting the manual approach to file management out of the window.
Yeah, sure. So let me just follow up on that to answer your question, Brian. Thanks, David, for that explanation. There are at least 3 different workflows that we can point to that are accelerated by the cloud. One is that as soon as that piece of media comes into the system, we can automatically start to generate the thumbnails that you need, add the watermarks that you need, and we can classify it because with our machine learning and machine vision services called Amazon Recognition, you can then identify the objects and classify them into different categories that makes that content searchable in the future. So that's one type of workflow. Another workflow is that if a video comes in, we can automatically add captions to that video because we've got speech. We can do machine learning on the speech that's coming in. We can do speech to text, and then that text gets added as captions to the video. So that's yet another workflow that's automated based on the cloud and Amazon's elemental services and speech to text services. And then we also have personalization, which we talked about before, where now that you've got your assets in one place, people who are developing the websites can now tailor the content based on user engagement with specific products. So rather than showing you all the different products on the website, we're going to hone in on the ones that the user is interested in, and that will drive engagement and drive ROI.
I think it's so cool when you go all the way to the end consumer, the buyer of your product or your service, and the buyer may be what movie or film am I going to watch on a streaming service? It may be what polo shirt am I going to buy off of a website. That it's now so important that us in creative actually have that close partnership with our marketing team members, because the personalization that the marketing team is in many ways responsible for on the website is inherently selective of the content that us as creatives are spending so much time producing. And it gives me the chills to know that we're there, that us as creatives and content producers have the huge impact is actually to the end user, who's going to either watch the movie and stream that or going to buy a polo shirt. And on the creative side, I'm asking myself the question of where are the key processes that I need to focus on so that the end user has the best experience. And David, you, through the Sella methodology, have kind of created this really simple 6-step creative process that we have to question ourselves about which of these creative workflow steps are important to my organization and what do they mean in the future of content production. So I think it just excites me to know that content production is not, it doesn't just end with the time in which I've done the handoff. It really is continuous improvement for the ongoing efficiency of what are we actually producing as creatives.
Well, I'm going to correct you on one thing, Brian, because it's
Please.
not that you don't figure out which of these steps are important to you. All of these steps are important to you from a creative operations perspective. This is the standard life cycle of a creative project, and even though we individually, all brands produce content in different ways and produce different content, all enterprise grade creative production follows this same linear process. And so what we like to do is first of all acknowledge it and put some guidelines around standardizing the approach so that we can then start to really create the creative funnel where we have a full understanding of the routing of a creative request at any given time, and that creative request can be approached uniquely based on prioritization, but all creative requests fall into the same kind of overall framework. So it's really important. This is when I say get your house in order. This is the guidelines that I'm talking about in terms of establishing an understanding of how you operate against these 6 phases of operations.
And is there one, and I appreciate keeping me honest that they're all relevant. Is there some that are easier to adopt than others, or I guess for us on the call who are probably screenshotting this or taking a photo of it to say I need to have this process discussed with my team, is there a methodology? I guess we're going to look at a methodology of prioritization based on what's important to me and at my individual organization.
There are different ways that technology can benefit different phases, so like the intake, standardizing intake to deliver an understanding of the level of effort required for a creative request and the prioritization of that, for example. That's something that actually can very easily be burned into, customized into the configuration of whatever intake system you're using, whether it be Google Form or Workfront custom dynamic request queue. So by configuring the intake, first of all defining it, then configuring it, you can just basically let the system route appropriately based on the questions that are presented to the requester.
And it comes back to the roles that we have within the organization are not getting any less complex, but they're shifting in terms of responsibility. And we'll call out just the top one, which is on the intake side, which is the role of project management is more important than ever. But let the operational efficiency of some of the automation and rules and routing remove the burden of the project manager to be every
Exactly.
asset.
Right, based on the criteria established with the questions on intake, you can establish the tier of the request. And on really low, like tier 3 content, very simplistic, that can then translate into a workflow where it bypasses some of the stage gates that a tier 1 high complex request would require.
And to look at it kind of on the holistic picture, there's a lot of plugged in systems and people and process to this slide, but it sort of embodies what David, from the process that is fundamental to define and operate within the organization. The ecosystem is then responsible for accepting content from your in-house studio that is probably growing ever more important and highly trending on the in-house agency fundamentals that we have to focus on. But we're still relying on freelancers to help fill the people gap that we have, and certainly agencies that are partners to our content production are all feeding into this ecosystem, which on the right side is this content experience for the user is meant to be holistic, and it needs to be consistent. I need to be able to know that what I'm seeing on my iPhone or my Android from a mobile experience is going to be the same thing that on my desktop we have these personalization capabilities to really deliver to you.
Yeah, I mean, this represents kind of another way of looking at this. Instead of having DAM at the center, it's having it at the bottom, and really as the foundational layer of the enterprise. And that gets to how you really truly deliver on an omni-channel strategy. And Jared Gingras at Real Story Group, just giving him a shout out, has a Real Story Group in general has great methodology in regards to the content hub, which is the foundational operational layer of asset management. Basically, dropping that down, dropping your approach to asset management into more a foundation approach, and lightening the weight, the content, the data, the rules that are in each of the individual channel tools. If we can drop that down into the foundational layer, that's really how you integrate and deliver against an omni-channel strategy, so that each of the channels that are producing content outbound to the public, publishing content outbound to the public, are just pulling from that foundational layer in a consistent way, as opposed to building up their approach with content data rules for one channel and then building up content data rules for another channel, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, DAM as the central hub, but more kind of thinking that in terms of the content hub foundational layer of the enterprise.
Couldn't agree more from a foundation perspective. And it's probably fair to say that there isn't a one size fits all solution. I heard you use the word channel, that each channel may kind of need some of their own operational technology efficiency that's unique. And we need to just have a holistic, integrated approach to the ecosystem, and maybe not necessarily a one size fits all.
Sure, but yes, and every channel will have different requirements and different skill sets, for example. But as we move to an omni-channel strategy, omni-channel by definition is consistency of brand identity on any channel that the consumer's experiencing it. So the only way to achieve that is to drop it into a layer against which every individual channel can pull the same asset type, albeit just formatted differently for that specific channel.
And to look at what it from a connected ecosystem perspective, David, you and Rana work with a lot of brands who have a multitude of systems, and I think you hit the nail on the head, which is they need to be respective of one another, and they need to be aware of one another. And some of the key systems that Global Edit is seeing in the creative ecosystem is certainly key to project management, but certainly your website and your content management system approach and how you store and then distribute these assets is, if they are all able to kind of work on a like-minded approach of content and data, it gives you that fluidity that we want to have within the brand of moving at the scale that we need to reach our end users' expectation. So David, I think we're in an interesting spot in Rana to kind of look at how has the ecosystem democratized creative ops.
Can I just say one thing? I might get in trouble for saying this. If you could go back one slide though.
Sure. And I don't think anyone gets in trouble when so please
go ahead. To the users out there, don't think of Google Drive and Slack as a project management system. Don't think of Box and Dropbox as a digital asset management system. These are lightweight collaborative tools that are essential to the organization. I'm a big fan of all of those, but there is a difference in regards to what true project management from a creative operations perspective requires, as is there a difference in terms of what real digital asset management requires within creative ops too.
Absolutely. The supporting tools of systems like Slack and Dropbox have really been so crucial to the new era of remote work and collaboration, and then the ultimate systems of records and systems like Workfront or Global Edit kind of being the backbone to those enterprise grade system that you expect.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. So David, you're helping us unpack a lot, and with Rana on the cutting edge of technology, Creative Ops 2.0. Rana, you're seeing a lot of the systems that Amazon is focused on, and I'm very impressed with the areas that Amazon Web Services is focused on. So help us unpack a little bit of Creative Ops 2.0 from a technology perspective.
Sure, and you asked the question about how has Amazon democratized access to all of these vertically integrated workflows for creative ops. And for one thing, some of the very expensive proprietary technology that we built back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, to recommend what products people should buy. You know, when you went to the Amazon retail site, you would see that, okay, people who bought this shoe also bought this pair of socks, right? That's a recommendation engine, and it took a lot of expertise and expense to build that. So when we say democratize, what we mean is we are putting that same recommendation engine technology in the hands of every business, be it like a 5-person company all the way to a Fortune 500. You no longer have to be a Fortune 100 now to build a website that has content that's more relevant to your users. You don't have to be a Netflix to build a video on demand service that recommends videos based on what people have watched already, because we have actually put all of that into a box for you and made it cheap and made it something you can experiment with and pay as you go with. So that's what we mean by democratization. And then, of course, you see some of these workflows here. It's not just the personalization. That whole workflow that I mentioned, where people were burdened with creating thumbnails, adding watermarks, cataloging, classifying, and searching. You know, I've had days when, you know, at one point 10 years ago, our whole team missed the Super Bowl, even though we were doing an ad campaign for the Super Bowl. We missed it because we were staying up all night because we couldn't find the content that we were supposed to have cataloged. So this whole, you know, the cloud is making it possible with Amazon recognition to classify this content at a terrific scale. I mean, one of our customers, C-SPAN, they're in the business, you know, C-SPAN obviously records thousands of hours of videos on political events in Congress and things like that. They told us that they were able to catalog 7,500 hours of video. So that they can search that content, which they were not able to do before the advent of Amazon recognition. So these are just a few examples of how we're democratizing and enabling, you know, whole new approaches to digital asset management.
And it's impressive the comprehensiveness that someone like C-SPAN can operate. And I think for ourselves at Global Edit, where we've been investing so much in AWS infrastructure to scale our solution to the market so quickly, is the barrier to entry. And I know we unpacked this a little bit in our first conversation, but the barrier to entry to leveraging this technology is no longer the hardware investment that you need to make to get going. It's like you said, Rana, it's on demand, it's there as you need it. And a lot of folks on this call who are maybe not as technologically oriented as those that are creating the content, any brand and any content creator is at the fingertips of implementing this type of technology. And certainly on our front, where we're bringing these technologies at a rapid scale through Global Edit, it's in days and weeks that you see gains in terms of technology implementation and not years. So super powerful.
I just want to challenge that a little bit. I'd say that all of the creators can take advantage of this technology. Implementation of the technology is still a little bit challenging or just a little technical, I should say. Typically beyond what the creative operations community is responsible for. But that being said, all of the functionality is so within reach, and that's what they can take advantage of.
Yeah, David, are you guys having to adjust your practices to sort of address that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, we are having to apply much more technical expertise to respond to interests of the clients so as to actually activate some of these solutions.
And I think that's key. Go ahead, Ron. I know you wanted to.
I was just going to say that I think the ease of implementation depends on the scenario. You don't have to be a deep machine language expert or computer scientist
100%.
to classify an image. You just need to drag and drop the image into recognition, and it'll classify it for you. So I think, you know, there are other things that may take a little bit more someone dedicated to implement, but we're trying to make this as easy as possible for everybody.
Yeah.
What I've come to learn is
I also think, sorry, I know we're getting deep, but I think it's applications like Global Edit, for example, that leverage the functionality of AWS that the creative ops community can take advantage of. You know, like the creative ops community won't, I mean, forgive me for not understanding, just like dropping an image into recognition, I think you need an application front end of some sort to actually take advantage of that functionality.
Yeah.
The piece here, and I know we have a couple of slides that I want to move forward to, but we're kind of unpacking something that's really interesting here. So I want to kind of hold the line to this slide for a second, which, you know, Rana, you're finding that the barrier is lower, and David, I think on your side, it's, well, the barrier is still challenging. I think part of what I think we need to question is the readiness of ourselves within each business to adopt at such a fast scale these major technological advantages, and are we all ready? And Rana, you called this out on Monday when we sat down to kind of catch the band up for a minute, which was like, you have the early adopters, and then you have the folks just behind that are kind of looking at the early adopters. And so we're in a really interesting place where, yeah, I mean, the technology is at our fingertips, but a lot of us here today are probably saying, well, I'm not doing Amazon recognition on my assets. And I guess it's hopefully a little bit of today's inspiration that means you'll go back to the folks that have that decision making.
Or actually, I would actually say to the community, like about the community, from the community perspective, is that they might not even be aware that Amazon recognition is in play. You know, so they're using applications that do have auto tagging features, but it just like the attributes just appear, you know, and they just benefit from them.
Yeah.
You know? So.
And I think that's the magic we expect as creatives, right? I don't want to know the algorithm or the machine learning lines of code that were written to accomplish this, but just insert it into my workflow seamlessly. Right?
Exactly. Yep.
Well, David, I think you're really helping us understand that not every business is there, and that we really need a prioritization framework to get started. And at Sella, there is a pretty amazing principle to go about doing that. So walk us through about the prioritization or the ROI framework that can help us here make some of those decisions about where in the technology or the process to focus.
Well, this just gets back to the prioritization of creative requests that I was talking about coming in through intake, you know, and the ability to standardize the questions that you're asking of your clients can then translate into quantifiable metrics that can be used in a formula to basically define the priority. You know, so we want to obviously get away from, well, you know, if a CEO asks calls up and has requests, of course, you know, that's a CEO, and there's certain dynamics you can't avoid. But more often than not, we are the creative services group is fielding all of these requests from potentially different clients where there's no understanding of really like how this request affects or is prioritized over another request. You can't just do it by due date. And if you give the ability to the requester to kind of like flag urgency themselves, everybody's going to say highly urgent, you know, because it's their material that they're requesting. So we can actually get to a formula where we create a metric that looks at the overall impact of the request to the business goals against the variables that you see here, you know, deadline, the brand impact, you know, and what from that actually we generate a formula in terms of how you rank each individual request, which can then be quantified in a way where you're pushing back on somebody that says, okay, if you're actually requesting this, sure, we can do it, but it's going to have impact on these other requests as well.
And one thing that I think is cool to kind of look at Rana's example from C-SPAN is, I guess they looked at the business impact of categorizing and keeping all of their content accessible to them, and it was something from a prioritization framework, more or less, indirectly from, and I guess for not writing down this exact formula because it's custom to each client that you work with, but that framework of deciding what do you need to focus on because of what's important to the business is really interesting when you look at it about how when you're implementing the technology like C-SPAN, they're able to make decisions at easier scale because I guess to kind of go back to barrier to entry with the right folks to implement, you can address those challenges.
Yes, you can turn everything into a batch process, which is what C-SPAN and customers like CBS also recognize.
Yeah.
C-SPAN, for example, had 97,000 videos in their database. They have 7,500 hours of programming that they need to index annually. And so they developed a process where they could just run these in batch through recognition and categorize all of that content so that if anybody asks them for an episode, they can pull it up right away. So yeah, I mean, you can, once you figure out how to use these interactively, like drag and dropping images, after that, you can figure out how to batch everything so that it's part of your process.
Very cool. And one aspect, just to kind of look at this across process to distribution, is you can see along the journey map where optimization and continuous improvement and the removal of redundancies plays into each step in the creative process. So I would encourage all of us here to kind of go back to the SELA framework of the creative process and the framework of prioritization to help understand the holistic journey. And I don't think we are even holistically representing here what the content journey map looks like, because there's obviously conceptualization and a lot of pre-planning that gets done here, but we then can be more goal-oriented in where we focus our time for improvement.
That's right. I mean, you're dealing with a maturity level increase over time in that previous example. So
absolutely. And one of the things, just to be respectful of time and to kind of get us to some of the real life examples where SELA and AWS has seen this, a couple more points to dive into, and then I want to give you both the floor to talk about how this is being put into use and maybe questioning whether it's even future, it's actually now. So one aspect here from the creative process to the business process is just looking beyond your quarterly campaign deliverables, your seasonal deliverables, and thinking in a more long-term approach to you're going to be feeding in multiple different types of content formats. You're also obviously really crux to where Amazon and SELA's focus is in that personalization aspects, and certainly from a task-oriented approach is being able to remove as much friction in review and approval and task assignment that we can, not to remove responsibility or roles from the process, but to elevate the focus that we have. And I think we can really quickly see this here on the right-hand side from a business process perspective, and how the role of customer data platforms and even the retail work will evolve to being fully digital. And so I think one really interesting learning that I've had from yourself, David, and Rana, is digital asset management in the creative process doesn't just end within the creative team and doesn't just end within the marketing team. It's all the way to that end consumer, that visitor to our website or our streaming app or whatever it might be, and being holistic to all of that.
Yeah, so the future state of DAM is merging static assets with other data sources, and so like customer data, for example, and that's really how you get to personalization. That's the fundamentals of personalization, like delivering this particular asset to this particular user. You have to do that based on marrying two databases, obviously, one that holds the creative content, the other that holds the customer data, and using logic in a way to leverage both.
So let's talk the future of DAM. Rana, you're on the cutting edge of the technologies that are mobilizing that. So help us kind of transition into what will be how recognition and personalization applies to the future of DAM.
Sure. So let me just touch quickly on distribution. Once your content is there on this S3, which is all our petabytes of object storage in the cloud, with one click, you can now distribute that content to the far reaches of the world. We have more than 200 edge locations so that we give your users a really fast experience, whether they're watching a video 3,000 miles away from the source, or whether they're consuming your website content. That CDN makes things really fast. In terms of what we have that's fairly futuristic, and I'll get to this with recognition in a second, but it's not just it's not just objects that recognition knows about. You, as a brand, can have specific types of products in your catalog that you can then train recognition to recognize. And now recognition is recognizing products within your brand. So that's a fairly futuristic application. And then as far as personalize is concerned, and I'll get to that after we talk about personalize more in depth, but there's several different dimensions. It's not just how many times people clicked on a product on your website. You could also tune, personalize the recommendation engine based on how much revenue is that product going to generate. And then you could show products that might be a little bit more lucrative for your business as opposed to other ones. So there's different ways you can weight the products and couple them with the user preferences to personalize that content. So these are some of the things that are fairly futuristic, but which are actually here today.
And Rana, for us on the creative side, it may start to influence how much time and effort and the types of creative we produce based upon the value that those products or services bring to the organization, because there's a more holistic understanding of what that engagement is to the end consumer. And I think that's really going to be interesting to see as we start to get more insights all the way down to the creative production level about where should we be spending our time, because I think at some point the ability to continuously scale with the same size team for more content can become really challenging. So Rana, you're seeing recognition and personalization having a great effect out in the wild, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of put some tangible examples down for all of us here today.
Sure. So on the left, you're seeing a car as it's moving along a road, and recognition kind of recognizing all the different objects that the driver is seeing. And as you can see, there's bounding boxes around each object that it's recognizing, and it's giving you a confidence score. How confident is it that the object in front of this car is a skateboard? You know, it's got 94% confidence there. So these are things that we see happening now in the world of autonomous driving, for example. And then on the right-hand side, you see several more examples. Nowadays, brands want to know who are the influencers on Instagram, who are promoting them, right? So, so the brand can actually use recognition to take images from these Instagram influencers, and they'll know, like, you know, which particular products are the influencers touting, and how much buzz they're generating. You can also get sentiment about your brand from Twitter. So you can scrape Twitter, and we have Amazon Comprehend, which can gauge the sentiment, the reaction of a new product launch, and you can tell right away whether the masses out there like your product or not. So these are just, you know, a few of the ways that recognition, personalize, comprehend, and our array of artificial intelligence services are helping brands.
And to bring it full picture here, Ron, I think something so cool is one of the major cosmetics companies that is using Global Edit to scale content production, because the influencer market is so large for them. The influencers are actually sharing and uploading their content right through Global Edit to allow the brand to leverage it from a creative standpoint as a represented brand piece of creative. So I think it's so amazing when you see that holistic capability and the fact that you as a creative are wanting to use content that's relevant or want to produce content that's relevant, and it's 360 to knowing and having the capabilities to understand how is the brand represented, which is a good segue to talk about personalization and dynamic content that, David, you're finding is really important for us to be thinking about in today's day and age of a lot of different competitiveness ways to reach our audience.
Absolutely. I mean, the end consumer assumes that content will be personalized for their particular relevancy, you know, and so that's where we move into approaches like dynamic content optimization and creative management platforms, where you're actually compiling the creative on the fly. So based on a user that comes to your website or a website where you're promoting an ad, it's amazing. I mean, there's this immediate auction for that user's attention. The brand that wins that auction then compiles the creative on the fly based on the persona of the end user that's been identified, what segment they fall in. So, you know, if you're visiting the website and it's nighttime, the ad might be demonstrate night, or if it's raining where you are, like right here. And so like we can actually pull like real-time geographic data to actually deliver the ad. So what's happening now, and what I think will be the real future of creative ops, is that the creation of creative services will be creating templates, basically. So we're going to move away from the approach of creating a static asset that is basically just handed off for promotion. You know, we're creating these templates that will pull in relevant components based on the customer data information on the fly in real time.
So we've talked about an amazing wealth of creative, marketing, and technological aspects that are a lot to unpack. So I think we have a couple minutes now, Rana and David, for you to both to give us some recommendations and how do we get started? Because I think the easy aspect is, well, I'm already doing this. This is simple. But for a lot of us, where this innovation is probably now going to be a priority, how do we go about getting started, and how do we address immediate impact on leveraging the scale of systems like Global Edit, but also the dynamic content that is so important to have an effect on our user base?
So I'm sorry that I didn't see this earlier, but I would recommend. So if we look at the no side of the equation here, like, are you doing these things today? No. All of the three things that are at the bottom should go above get a creative management solution. Those are the things you need to define first. So you define your creative ecosystem, you know, your tiers, all of this is basically getting the house in order. Once you actually have that understanding, then you'll know what creative management solution is appropriate for your particular need. When I see the word solution, I'm thinking of technology specifically. Solution can be just like an approach of like, what are the steps that we do, but those three things need to happen first. Either you do that internally yourself if you have the resources, or you find partners like Sela who can help you with it.
The get the house in order is something that I've written down about 7 times as we've kind of I've input my speaking notes to kind of adopt to our conversation today, and I can't stress that's enough. And Rana, how about from your point of view, the technology is here, it's available. How are you, for the brands that are the early adopters, and to garner more early adopters from this call, how do we get started from the technology side?
Yeah, so I would say just create an AWS account and then kind of explore some of the services. But once you kind of get an idea of what's possible from webinars like this and from YouTube videos, reach out to your AWS account team, reach out to your tech partners, Global Edit, and folks like David, and let us help you figure out how you want to move forward.
Very, very cool. So we are going to transition to a couple different questions. Before we do, for anyone that needs to jump off ahead of the next call on the hour, I want to really thank everyone so much for spending the 3 times now with us to unpack the creative, the technology, and the process. So we're going to transition. There has been a bunch of questions that have come in, and there's just 2 that I want to kind of impart for conversation here, which is if I'm implementing automation in my creative workflow, which one should I get started on first? It's probably, and I'm gathering that there's a lot of opportunity to automate. So can we help give some context about where to automate first and what to focus on?
From a creative operations perspective, I would say task-based triggers. You know, that's the easiest starting point. So once the workflow is defined, create predecessor relationships between those tasks that, you know, once this person marks the task complete, it goes to the other person. The next easy entry point for automation is automated approval workflows. So based on the category of or tier of job type, you can standardize the stage gates that are required in terms of who needs to have visibility over review and approval of the content.
Awesome. And Rana, anything to weigh in on that question or feedback that you might have?
Yeah, so from an AWS perspective, I would say automate the ingestion of the assets. So get your SFTP server automated, bring the assets in so they go into S3. So once that's automated, then a whole ecosystem is available to you.
Makes a lot of sense. And
it
gives you the comprehensiveness that I think one of the components that we talked about offline together was storage is almost a commodity at this point, right? Storage is endless. So have that comprehensive ability to manage all of your content and be less worried if you're increasing the size of your on-site servers. Have your content in the cloud. So we had one other question that I thought was pretty interesting that I wanted to bubble up to both of you, which is, if the content component is automated, what about the data side of it? And how do I keep my data around my assets, probably, core to the metadata that we care so much about? How do I keep that up with all of the assets themselves? And is there a method or any recommendation there to make sure that I don't lose sight of all of my metadata, which I would garner is probably fairly important to the continuous improvement?
Well, so lose sight, I mean, like there's you can unpack that a little bit, like meaning you lose metadata or you just lose sight of the overall governance of your metadata. When we talk about the asset lifecycle in general, like one of the main phases of the asset lifecycle is the manage phase, which translates into your ability to audit the way that you're managing content in general, including all of the governance around all of the ancillary data of which content is identified. So it's very important to have a routine approach to auditing and analyzing the current state of asset management and looking at different ways that is the data that you're focused on relevant today, just as much as it was yesterday. If not, what can you retire? Same thing with your archive approach of the asset lifecycle. Is there content that you probably should delete? Do you have deletion or retention policies around that? So it's asset management it's not a set it and forget it. It's a continuous effort.
Rana, one of the things that you called out was, the concept of a cloud champion. Is there champions within the creative team, within the marketing team that are pushing for these types of technologies because of the scale that they create?
Yes, I think that it's very important to have a person or a group of people who are very forward thinking in terms of what needs to happen for digital transformation within the company, sort of establish a cloud center of excellence, figure out what skills they need, and then, do a sort of line up a project, a simple POC where they can kick the tires on a lot of these services. I think that's very important.
Very good. Well, folks, we're right at the 1 hour mark, so I want to go ahead and pass it back to Henry Stewart and Jeanette, who's just going to quickly close us out. Before I do, I want to again thank you, Rana and David. You've taught me a lot. Hopefully, everyone on this call
this was fun.
Learned a ton, and thank you both for spending the time with me.
Yeah, thank you. This has been super awesome. Thank you for allowing me to kind of like challenge ideas, and get into the weeds. I appreciate it.
Yeah, if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be helping to better everyone who's going to take advantage of this content. So
totally.
Thank you, and Jeanette, back over to you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all very much indeed for such an excellent series. And thanks to all of our attendees for joining. We hope to see many of you at the Festival of Creative Ops. I've put that in the chat for you all if you'd like to have a look if you don't know about it already. Global Edit are one of the sponsors there, and Brian, David and Rana will be there. So we hope to see you then. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.